But for much of this year, we've been separated from the people that so many of us rely on.
Everyone wants some hope and wants some optimism, and I think the Earthshot encompasses urgent optimism.
Royal insiders are buzzing with claims of a scandal that could rock the monarchy. Prince William, they say, took drastic action against Camilla after Catherine was embarrassed in front of world leaders. Was this the breaking point? Watch until the end and hit that subscribe button for more. For years, Catherine and Camilla shared the same grand corridors, the same public stages, and the same carefully arranged family photographs. On the surface, they smiled warmly for cameras and exchanged polite words at public events. But behind the closed doors of the palace, whispers from longtime staff painted a very different picture. The tension wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet, calculated, and often masked as coincidence. Invitations to key events would somehow arrive late for Catherine. Scheduling changes would ensure her public appearances were overshadowed by another engagement. Even her seating at formal dinners would occasionally be altered at the last minute, shifting her away from important conversations. These weren't accidents, at least according to those who had served in the palace for years. They noticed patterns, small moments that, when added together, seemed to reveal an undercurrent of rivalry. Catherine, for her part, never let it show. She carried herself with grace and focus, determined not to give fuel to speculation. But those closest to her couldn't help but notice the subtle frost that sometimes passed between her and Camilla. It was the kind of unspoken tension that could remain buried for years, until the right stage and the right moment brought it crashing into the open. And that moment was about to arrive. The night of the state dinner at Buckingham Palace was meant to be a symbol of unity and prestige. The halls gleamed with polished gold trim, the chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars, and the air carried the soft scent of fresh roses arranged in perfect symmetry. It wasn't just another formal gathering. This was a G20 summit dinner, bringing together some of the most powerful leaders on the planet. Every step, every handshake, and every glance would be captured by dozens of cameras. Catherine was prepared. Her gown was a deep, jewel-toned masterpiece, tailored for movement and presence. Her jewelry was chosen with intention, reflecting both elegance and strength. Even her hairstyle, sleek yet soft, struck a perfect balance between tradition and modern grace. She walked into the ballroom poised and serene, ready for a night that would showcase the royal family at its best. But somewhere behind the glamour, something had already changed. The seating chart, finalized just hours before, placed Catherine not beside key allies or influential guests, but at the far end of the table. It seemed small to the untrained eye. Yet in the language of royal protocol, it was like moving a star player to the sidelines in the middle of a championship game. And this was just the beginning. Dinner service began smoothly. Diplomats chatted in low, polite tones. The soft hum of conversation was accompanied by the gentle clink of crystal. Catherine, ever gracious, engaged her new table neighbors warmly, refusing to let the odd seating arrangement affect her mood. Then came the second course. A waiter approached, carrying a tray of red wine. It was a delicate moment. Crystal glasses filled to the perfect level, every step calculated to avoid mishap. But just as he reached Catherine, a subtle movement occurred. Those who later reviewed the scene described it as almost imperceptible. A glass shifted just slightly into the waiter's path. The tray tipped, and a cascade of deep red wine spilled across Catherine's gown. The rich fabric absorbed it instantly, the color blooming like a cruel scar across the carefully chosen dress. Gasps swept across the table. Cameras caught the moment from multiple angles, their flashes immortalizing the humiliation. Catherine froze for a heartbeat. Then, with remarkable composure, dabbed at the stain, smiled softly, and reassured those nearby that she was fine. But then, in the midst of the polite murmurs, came something that changed the mood entirely. A burst of laughter from the head of the table, sharp, unguarded, and unmistakably out of place. The sound was quickly muted by a technician, but not before William heard it. And when his eyes met Camilla's, she wasn't hiding a smile. William had been raised to control his reactions in public, to put the crown before personal feelings. But in that moment, watching his wife sit in a ruined gown while his stepmother smirked, something in him shifted. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze. He joined in the polite applause for speeches, he clinked glasses for toasts, but his focus was fixed. This wasn't just an accident, not in his mind, and it wasn't something he was willing to ignore. When the last guest had gone, William moved quickly through the palace corridors, his stride purposeful. He found Camilla in a smaller reception room, drink in hand. The silence between them was heavy. Then, in a low, measured voice, he asked her directly, Was the seating change her doing? Was the spill deliberate? And what about the laughter? Camilla denied any wrongdoing, framing the night's events as a series of unfortunate coincidences. But her eyes, steady, almost defiant, told him she wasn't concerned about convincing him. William left that room certain of one thing: this wasn't over. The days that followed brought whispers through the palace halls. Staff members, some of whom had been silent for years, began to share what they knew. A senior aide, responsible for overseeing seating at the dinner, privately confirmed that Catherine's last-minute placement change had come from Camilla's office. It wasn't questioned at the time. Last-minute changes weren't unheard of. But in hindsight, it looked suspicious. Then came the security footage. Cameras positioned around the ballroom had captured every second of the night from multiple angles. When William reviewed it in private, the scene unfolded in damning detail. Camilla spoke to the waiter moments before the approach. Then, as the tray neared Catherine, she shifted her glass, perfectly aligned with the moment of impact. Finally, there were documents. Notes and emails between event planners and Camilla's staff included subtle but telling references to Catherine's gown color and the decision to serve red wine with the main course. Nothing explicit, but enough for William to see a pattern. By the time he set the evidence down, the matter was no longer about speculation. In his mind, it was about proof. In his study, William sat surrounded by the evidence: photos, testimonies, footage, each piece fitting together into a picture he could no longer ignore. When Camilla arrived, her expression was guarded. William didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He told her plainly what happened was unacceptable, and he had proof it was deliberate. He demanded two things: a private apology to Catherine and the removal of specific ceremonial privileges she held as queen consort. This wasn't about titles, he explained. It was about respect. For Catherine, for the monarchy, and for the public trust. And if the palace refused to act, he would make sure the truth was known beyond its walls. With that, the situation shifted from a family conflict to something far more dangerous: a direct challenge to the balance of the monarchy. Charles had weathered many challenges in his time, but this one cut to the heart of his reign. On one side was his wife, the queen consort. On the other, his son and future king, determined to defend his own wife's dignity. The decision wasn't just personal. It was constitutional. Removing privileges from a queen consort was unprecedented in modern times. Doing nothing risked damaging the public's faith in the royal family. An emergency meeting of the Privy Council was called. Legal experts, senior advisors, and select royals debated the issue deep into the night. Some urged Charles to protect Camilla, warning of backlash. Others argued that William's stance represented the values the monarchy needed to embrace for its future. As Charles listened, the image of Catherine at that dinner, poised despite the stain, and the steely resolve in William's eyes played over in his mind. He knew a choice was coming, and it wouldn't please everyone. The decision revealed itself on a crisp morning when the palace unexpectedly summoned the press. The room filled with reporters, cameras, and the quiet hum of anticipation. William stepped forward alone. He spoke of honor, unity, and the responsibility of every royal family member to protect the dignity of the crown. Without naming Camilla at first, he addressed the dinner incident as a breach of trust. Then came the words no one expected. Effective immediately, the queen consort's honorary titles and ceremonial privileges would be withdrawn. The move, he said, was rare but necessary, a statement that no one, regardless of position, was above the values the monarchy stood for. The press erupted. Headlines circled the globe within hours. Some hailed the decision as bold and overdue. Others called it too extreme. But one thing was certain: history had been made. In the days following William's announcement, the palace went quiet. Not in the absence of work or ceremony, but in a different way. Conversations were hushed, glances carried more meaning, and everyone seemed to move with an extra layer of caution. The air was charged, as though every person inside those gilded walls knew they were living through a turning point in royal history. Camilla's retreat from public life was swift and complete. There was no grand farewell, no public explanation, no official statement to soften the blow. 1 week, she was a constant figure at ribbon cuttings, diplomatic receptions, and charity visits. The next, her absence was obvious. Her scheduled appearances vanished from the official calendar. Where her name had been printed on palace documents, it was now conspicuously missing. Portraits featuring her alongside the king were quietly relocated. In the grand halls, where royal history hung framed in heavy gold, her image now appeared less frequently. Sometimes moved to corridors with fewer visitors. In the more symbolic spaces, like the receiving rooms where dignitaries were welcomed, her absence spoke volumes. It wasn't banishment, at least not in name. But for anyone watching closely, it was a clear message that the balance of influence inside the palace had shifted. And in the middle of that change stood Catherine. For years, she had carried herself with poise and restraint, even when subtle slights and whispered rivalries swirled in the background. Now, she stepped into the light with a new kind of authority, one earned not through confrontation, but through resilience. Her first major engagement after the scandal wasn't a royal banquet or a high-profile diplomatic meeting. Instead, she chose a cause close to her heart: children's mental health. The event was modest in scale compared to a state dinner, but its impact was enormous. Crowds gathered well before her arrival, some holding handmade signs of support, as Catherine stepped out of the car wearing a tailored sapphire gown. The applause swelled. She moved through the room, greeting each guest with warmth, leaning in to listen, placing a gentle hand on a shoulder, and sharing moments of genuine connection. The press, who had been covering the palace tensions relentlessly, now had a different story to tell. Headlines focused on her grace, her dedication to service, and her ability to rise above personal conflict. Commentators called her a symbol of quiet strength, noting how her public support seemed to grow even stronger after the dinner incident. Behind the scenes, the ripple effects were even more telling. Senior courtiers, those who had once balanced loyalties between the king's household and the Prince and Princess of Wales, began leaning more heavily toward William and Catherine. Invitations for them to represent the monarchy abroad increased. Charities and international organizations sought their patronage, seeing them as the face of a more modern, relatable royal family. Within the palace, the dynamic in meetings shifted subtly but unmistakably. Catherine's voice carried more weight in discussions about charitable initiatives, public appearances, and even certain ceremonial traditions. William, too, appeared more decisive, his actions signaling that unity and respect within the royal household were now non-negotiable. Internationally, the impact was just as significant. World leaders who had been present at the state dinner took note of how William and Catherine navigated the fallout. In private conversations, diplomats reportedly described the couple as a strong and united team, the kind of leadership they believed could help stabilize the monarchy for decades to come. Invitations for joint appearances from foreign governments increased, with an emphasis on projects that combined diplomacy with humanitarian work. For Camilla, the shift was undeniable. While she remained the king's consort in title, her role in the day-to-day public image of the monarchy had been dramatically reduced. Public curiosity about her absence lingered, but with no official comment from the palace. Speculation eventually quieted, replaced by the ongoing narrative of William and Catherine stepping into a more prominent, visible role. The public perception of the monarchy began to evolve. Among younger generations, William's decisive action was seen as a sign that the royal family could adapt, that it was willing to hold itself accountable. Among traditionalists, there was still some discomfort with how openly the matter had been handled, but even many of them acknowledged that the monarchy had emerged with a clearer sense of leadership. Catherine herself seemed transformed, not in style or demeanor, but in presence. Her engagements drew more coverage, her speeches carried more weight, and her every appearance was framed by the context of having endured and overcome a moment that could have diminished her standing. Instead, it elevated her. And as for William, his choice to challenge tradition in defense of his wife and the values of the crown sent a message not just to the public, but to every member of the royal household. Respect was no longer optional, and loyalty to the institution would be measured not by silence, but by integrity. I want to hear what you think. Was William right to take this stand, or should such matters remain behind closed doors? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to dive deeper into more royal moments that changed everything, click the video on your screen now.